Hello, and welcome to our advanced webinar series on the best home network setup practices for Roon. My name is Nathan, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Feel free to stick around until the end of today's webinar, as we'll be holding a live questions and answers session to help with any questions that you may have had throughout this presentation. Today, we'll be covering a few different kinds of topics. Those topics will be optimal practices and setups in your home, specifically how to set up your listening area with your own hi-fi equipment. We'll also be giving some advanced networking tips. And finally, we'll be giving you some helpful tools for troubleshooting common issues that you might be running into. You're welcome to ask us questions throughout this webinar, and we'll be answering your questions live at the end of the session today. So please feel free to keep those questions coming. So why does a network matter in the first place? Well, to put it simply, Roon requires a properly functioning home network to get the best possible experience. An improperly configured network will give you a bad experience, be it from bad networking hardware or bad net connections between hardware. Any sorts of issues will lead you to experience issues in Roon. Maybe you'll see a remote that infinitely loads and doesn't connect to your core. Maybe you're finding a certain zone or audio device isn't showing up inside the Roon app. Or maybe you're running into issues with audio playback. None of those experiences are things that we would expect in a properly run Roon system. And our goal today is to give you the tools to sort out what's happening and minimize issues in Roon that could be caused by a network. No matter what your network setup is like, there are a few important factors to keep in mind when you're using Roon to make sure that you're getting the best experience. First and foremost, your Roon core should always be wired via Ethernet. And if possible, any devices that you're using to store music and stream music to your core should also be wired via Ethernet. That specifically means that if your music is located on another device and is being streamed over your network to your core, maybe you're using a NAS or storing your music on another PC, we highly recommend that that device is not connected via Wi-Fi. Instead, it's better if that device is connected via Ethernet and can stream directly that music to your core, which is also connected to the Ethernet. We found that using an ISP or Internet Service Provider provided router can also cause an issue or poor experience when you're using Roon. These ISP-provided routers seem to often use underpowered or poorly behaved hardware or software inside of them. And using that gear often leads to suboptimal outcomes when you're trying to use them with Roon. To that same end, we have found that a lot of Apple networking gear, such as the Airport Express, the Time Capsule, and the Airport Extreme all seem to have problems with Roon due to poorly behaved hardware. If possible, please don't use these kinds of networking devices if you wish to have the best Roon experience that you possibly can. It's also worth noting, Roon does not support multiple subnets. This means, basically, all of the devices on your network must be connected to the same IP range. Avoid using Wi-Fi range extenders or power line adapters when you're using Roon in your home. These devices modify the behavior of your base network, and they'll hamper Roon's ability to communicate and see the devices as they're available across your home. This means you may accidentally limit the performance that Roon's able to offer when streaming your music to the different devices in your home because of the way that it sees zones and is able to understand how your zones are set up due to your network settings. So let's go over some optimal setups for different home sizes. First up, let's talk about medium homes. For best performance, you want to have your core and your endpoints connected via Ethernet, but your Roon remotes themselves, such as your phone or your iPad, can be connected via Wi-Fi. It's perfectly fine to have one router set up to cover your whole house. You likely don't need more than that. This assumes that you don't have concrete or other heavy building materials blocking the signal coming from your router and then reaching across your whole home. Generally speaking, a single strong router should be able to cover your whole home without any issue. With that said, if you're using a network modem router combo that's provided by your internet service provider, you may want to make sure that that modem and router is set up in bridge mode, meaning that it's functioning exclusively as a modem. From that, you want to connect a stronger router to that modem, and in that case, you'll be providing Wi-Fi from your more powerful router that you have provided instead of the combo unit given to you by your ISP. This ensures that you'll be taking advantage of whatever features are included with the modem that they have provided and the functionality that you're looking for there, but you're also able to ensure that the very best signal and very best performance from that internal network inside your home are coming from that router that you have provided. If you find that your router is unable to cover the entire area of your home, then it may be time to consider an additional wired access point that is broadcasting to the specific area that isn't connecting or isn't finding signal to that main router you're using. Again, if possible, you want to wire that access point to your initial router so that you have that wired signal going between the two of them. You don't want to use a Wi-Fi range extender, as that can break up into different networks across your home and create different subnets, or it can cause bandwidth issues as the signal needs to bounce off the router and then into the extender before it can reach your device. We do recommend using a single router if at all possible, or we recommend using a single wired access point in addition to that router if you must. When it comes to larger home, many of the same principles still apply. For example, we're always going to recommend that you connect your Roon core and your endpoints via Ethernet whenever possible. Of course, your remotes can still connect via Wi-Fi. For a larger setup, multiple access points and a network switch will likely be needed. And whenever possible, we recommend that those access points be wired via Ethernet directly to the main router in your system or the switch closest to the router. In this case, we recommend Cat5e, that's 1 gigabit per second cable or better, for ensuring the best performance across your network. Now, if you have a home where running that cable isn't possible, or you simply can't manage the kind of setup that a router and multiple wired access points around the home require, then it's likely that you'll need a mesh-style network. Mesh networks could include devices such as the Netgear Orbi, Amazon Eero, Linksys Velop, or the Asus Lyra systems. These are all used by our customers, and they're systems where each access point communicates with each other via a dedicated Ethernet backhaul. And these devices have an Ethernet connection that can be used on the mesh satellite for direct connection to your remotes or system outputs. Essentially, a mesh system might not be our first choice of recommendation for your network. However, if you're living in a situation where you can't run the cables necessary for a proper router and access point setup, then that mesh network is a wonderful stand-in. And with the backhaul system that they use, they can communicate very adequately and directly to their main router system and back to your modem. The Ethernet ports located on these mesh router satellites function pretty well as direct Ethernet connections that you can use for your core or audio endpoints in larger homes or any home where you can't run a direct wired system. Really, it's perfectly fine to have your core in a server closet or a rack, and then have your audio devices connected via Ethernet directly to that network. Or you can use a Roon bridge as an in-between output that gives a USB or SPDIF output for the connections for the devices that you want to use across your network. We recommend avoiding managed switches whenever possible. Managed switches have been known to need just the right amount of tweaks to work properly. And when in doubt about what settings are needed, we really recommend using an unmanaged switch if you're going to be using a switch at all for managing your network needs when using Roon. What about designating listening areas? Well, when streaming your music through Roon, we highly recommend using a communication protocol that supports the highest sample rate for your music. Now, in this instance, you're using Roon, And so hopefully you're using a Roon-ready device. We highly recommend using that Roon-ready streaming protocol, as it will ensure the best quality signal in every instance versus Chromecast or AirPlay, for example. You'll optionally want to tweak the sound in your listening room by implementing Roon's DSP functionality. And some of those different functionalities will require more network bandwidth, such as upsampling to DSD. Now, that decision making will be entirely up to you. It'll be up to your ear to decide what EQ settings you want and which ones are best suited for your setup in your listening room. What about our thoughts on Wi-Fi? The bottom line is that ultimately, Wi-Fi is noisy, and in terms of performance, often unreliable. It's really mainly designated for being used by your remote, on your phone, or on your iPad, and it's really not the best for audio streaming. It'll work in a pinch, but it's not what we're going to recommend. Now, it is true that Wi-Fi can traverse through walls and make a lot of things more convenient and for a lot of setups, but that also means that it can cause interference issues. Because of that, we often recommend using a 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection, as it has broader bandwidth and less interference from neighboring Wi-Fi channels compared to 2.4 GHz. Sometimes Wi-Fi issues can occur simply because you're used in a large city, or maybe you have multiple neighbors who are broadcasting on their own personal Wi-Fi setups. Wi-Fi can even be degraded if someone is using a microwave in the same home. If you have many routers or access points set up in the same Wi-Fi network channel, those multiple routers, especially if they're not set up as a mesh system or something similar, can cause increased congestion and, again, hamper the performance and effectiveness of your Wi-Fi network. Another reality of technology is that Wi-Fi protocols change over time. If you're using an older PC for Wi-Fi, it very well could have an old Wi-Fi network card, and that might just not support certain speeds or certain types of network protocols. Mesh-style Wi-Fi networks are still Wi-Fi. They use their own extra Wi-Fi channels to communicate from node to node. That's from one of the pucks to the other pucks. And that means that they have an extra channel or an extra way of communicating with each other. Now, that gets them past the majority of congestion in the home, but again, it's still Wi-Fi. At the end of the day, Wi-Fi is still mainly for using your remote, and that's there for convenience. If you can, we're going to recommend using Ethernet. Sometimes you have to use Wi-Fi, we get it. But just to make sure it's all clear, Ethernet is our main recommended source for listening to your music. And when you ask us, we're going to ask, hey, if you're having no problem, is there a chance you could plug it in via Ethernet? We'll see if that offers a better performance from your system. Now, let's dig into some advanced networking tips. When we're talking about managed and unmanaged switches, we find that managed switches often cause issues with Roon. We've mentioned this a little bit earlier, but again, just to reiterate, we recommend using an unmanaged switch to run your setup. And this means that the unmanaged switch is simply plug and play. It's not configured via web interface or anything like that. We want simplicity. We don't need detailed rules changing how your network switch performs. We want it to act as a simple communication point, and we want Roon to be able to communicate as freely as possible across a switch. Power line adapters, that is, adapters that plug into the power outlet in your wall and through the circuitry in your wall, extend the internet connection available in your home, are entirely unreliable. We do not recommend power line adapters. Instead, we really recommend that you use a mesh-style network instead, or other kinds of extenders, or ultimately, if possible, an Ethernet connection. DNS servers, that is, dynamic name servers, which are tasked with converting website names into IP addresses, can play a part in how quickly Roon can respond to network requests. We have found that ISP DNS servers that are provided automatically on your ISP-provided modem are frequently unstable. In recent Roon updates, we've tried to harden Roon against DNS failures, but we found better overall reliability comes from using either Cloudflare DNS, the Quad9 DNS, or Google's provided DNS. If you use IP address communication inside of Roon, we highly recommend that you use an IP address reservation. Usually, that IP address lease time is relatively short. It's about 24 hours. So if you're going to use IP communication, we recommend that you set up an IP address reservation for your router specific to the device used in Roon. You'll be able to find that setting in your router, and that will ensure the most reliable performance there. If you're not sure what that means, it's okay. Chances are it's not something that you're looking to use. However, if you are interested in managing the IP address communication on your network, manage that performance inside of Roon and make sure that you're using an IP address reservation inside of your router configuration if at all possible. If you want to use IPv6, just keep in mind that while running Roon does work via IPv6, it's still a technology that's being rolled out. And if possible, we do recommend that you use IPv4 if you're seeing any experiences or issues with IPv6. Next up, troubleshooting some common issues. If you're experiencing any problems, you can save a lot of time and headache by running some really basic tests on your network. And the philosophy that we'd like to keep in mind is really just the process of simplifying and then rebuilding. You're looking to eliminate certain aspects of your network, certain things that might be causing trouble going, and to try and reduce and take away the number of problem factors, and then put them back together. Then you check. Now that I've removed this particular cable, maybe a piece of networking hardware, and replaced it with something else, or bypassed a connection and removed an interim device, any of that simplification process can help with finding out, hey, whatever I removed from the setup was actually the issue. We find that oftentimes taking the network apart and simplifying it is the easiest way to troubleshoot a networking-related Roon issue. If you can just leave the router and Roon core connected via Ethernet to see if the issue persists, then you have a baseline and can continue to add complexity from that point. Again, you just take your device at your core, have it connected via Ethernet to your router, and then see if your remote still can't see it, or if you still have that audio dropout or other similar issues. Likewise, you may be able to connect your audio zone via Ethernet, troubleshoot from the other end, and then see, does my audio zone still not work properly when wired? Again, we're simplifying the number of connections here, removing that Wi-Fi setup, so on and so forth. You want to make sure that your Roon core and your remotes are on the same subnet as each other. If they're not on the same subnet or the same IP address range, then they won't be able to see each other. And that means ensuring that while your core is wired, the Wi-Fi network that it's being broadcast to is the same Wi-Fi network that your wireless devices are also on, and that they're using the same IP range. We have to make sure that the network subnets are all the same thing, so that all the different devices are able to see each other. If you have an ISP-provided modem router combo unit, and if you're using another router that you have yourself provided to broadcast Wi-Fi around your home, make sure that only one of those devices is performing and routing the IP address assigning. Again, you want to make sure that your network-provided combo device is set up in bridge mode, that it's not acting as a secondary router function, because you want to use your own router that you've provided. Making sure it's in bridge mode will basically guarantee that you're not running improper IP provisioning, that you're not running into any issues or any funky networking routing from different devices connecting to the wrong networks, even though the networks are named the same. Little things of that nature are what we want to do to make sure that all those little areas are tidied up so that you have a very clean signal and a clean overall network that your devices are able to connect to. VPNs and Apple Private Relay are different services that can cause Roon to not work properly at all. What you're doing with a VPN or a virtual private network is you're tricking the Roon core into thinking that it's part of a different network, or you're tricking your device into thinking that it's not inside of the network that you're looking to be a part of. And what that would mean is that the core is not able to see the devices that are on the network because, well, it doesn't think they're there. And it thinks it's a part of a totally different network. Therefore, it has no clue to search for those devices that are on your network because, well, they're not there. So we recommend that you don't use any of those VPN services unless your VPN is configured specifically to exclude Roon traffic or that your VPN is on a router level. A router level VPN means that the entire network is being privately isolated out to a separate location. It's being broadcast as a whole unit, and your core will be a part of that whole unit as it's being VPN'd across the world. And because it's still a part of that whole network and all the devices on it, it will be able to see everything because they're all part of that same network, and it'll be able to connect and play your music as you would expect. Most routers have a setting called IGMP proxying or IGMP snooping. If you're having issues with multicast, which means that audio device discovery or Roon remote connecting, you can try and toggle that IGMP switch on and off and see if that helps with any of those issues. Now, if you have any questions about where to get help, or if you want to take a deeper dive on any of the topics that we've covered today, or if maybe you've brought new questions to mind, or maybe we haven't addressed the question that you're looking for help with, we're happy to give you some general advice as to what the best practices are, how to use Roon, and how you can best facilitate what's going on in your system with the questions and answers session in this webinar. But when it comes to active troubleshooting and making the most of solving a current problem that you're trying to work through with your system, go ahead and reach out to us at community.roonlabs.com. We have full-time staff there, and our whole community of people who are inside of the Roon Labs community are super helpful and extremely knowledgeable. It's a great resource for learning knowledge associated with like-minded people and ideally finding solutions to problems that you might be experiencing with Roon. If you're looking for tools for learning more about Roon, if you're hoping to solve your own problems all by yourself, or if you're just looking for screenshots on how things work and looking to build a general knowledge of how Roon works and what it's able to do, go to help.roonlabs.com. It's a huge knowledge base provided with tons of troubleshooting and useful tips and resources for understanding what Roon is capable of and how it can be used as a tool. Again, go to community.roonlabs.com for direct access to our technical support team, as well as our community full of technically knowledgeable people and a huge resource for active troubleshooting and problem solving for your system. If you're looking for more proactive ways to learn and understand what Roon does and how you can use Roon, go to help.roonlabs.com. We'll be opening up our questions and answers session now, and we'll be answering any questions that you might have had throughout this webinar, as well as any additional questions that you have now. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch you again soon. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us here. I see we've had some questions come in, so I will go ahead and get to answering those. I'll leave this section up on screen just so you have those links and resources easy to write down or visit if you are interested. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. My colleague Norris may be joining me here in person to answer any of the technical questions we come across. And Ben and Connor will be helping via chat as well. I see we have someone with a hand raised. We won't be taking voice or in-person questions at this time, so please feel free to use the Q&A section of the webinar to ask any questions that you might have. So one of the first questions we got was if we're able to name brands or models, could we give some hardware suggestions for network setups? And truth be told, we're pretty platform agnostic. We're not necessarily looking to be very, very specific in the precise hardware that you must use. We would generally recommend that you use a more powerful 802.11 AC router, so a newer generation, newer spec Wi-Fi access point, and that would be a great recommendation for a medium-sized home. Past that, as your home needs get more and more specific, so will the hardware that we would recommend for making a network work better in your home. and so that's a great question to bring into community, where our community members can give you their personal experience from just a myriad of different kinds of homes. And our technical support team can chime in and give you some of their own feedback of, these are the things that we would recommend and no work or no don't work. So our recommendation isn't really going to, have specific hardware in mind in terms of brand or specific models. It's just kind of specific archetypes of a device, if you will. And for that broad coverall of what will work best for most homes, that strong AC router that can sustain, a lot of devices connecting to it. That's going to be our first recommendation that we would make. Another question that's come in is asking about Mocha connections. If you're not familiar, that is multimedia over coaxial connection. And that's coming from someone who's mentioning that they can't run an Ethernet cable in their home. However, they have the ability to run via that coax connector. And our general policy is that it has gotten better over the years, but it's not going to be a recommended choice. If you can, we're going to recommend, of course, a direct Ethernet connection or a mesh style network before we would recommend a Mocha connection. And, you can try it. And if you run into issues, likely our first recommendation is going to be, can you remove that Mocha connector from the equation and try a different kind of run through the internet, even if that includes using Wi-Fi or a mesh system, if possible. So they can work, they are functional, but not necessarily a highly recommended pick on our end, just for reliability as well as data throughput purposes. Another question we got in is asking, hey, how do I know if my signal going into my DAC is perfect? How do I know I'm getting bit perfect sound directly to my listening system? It's a great question. And fortunately, Roon has a feature called Signal Path, which will confirm exactly that. So you're going to play music in Roon to your zone in question. Roon will display a little light to the left-hand side of the play bar, kind of the left middle, and that light will turn a bunch of different colors. And depending on the type of signal you're sending and the quality of signal that is being broadcast to your zone, Roon will tell you exactly what is being delivered and what is being received from your streaming source and things like that. You can, tell from clicking on that a specific breakdown of exactly what's happening to your music, what resolutions it's playing at, if you're performing any DSP features. All of that information is available there. So yeah, that's an awesome feature that Roon can communicate to you directly what exactly is happening inside of your music stream. If you want to see kind of a visual breakdown and you have questions about what it looks like, or you have any more questions like that, check out help.roonlabs.com. Go ahead and just type in Signal Path, and you'll see screenshots and really in-depth descriptions of exactly what that feature is and how you can utilize it when you're looking to see what Roon is doing. All right, someone's asking about upgrading to an audio grade Ethernet switch. We haven't on our side found any proof that changing a switch for a branded audio switch makes any difference in the sound or performance of your system. As far as Roon is concerned, our main focus is to emphasize how we can get quality signal to your devices. Regular good old-fashioned networking gear does the trick, and it does it very well. our goal and our focus here is to make sure that that signal is delivered reliably and robustly. And that's why we've set forward the kind of base hardware recommendations that we have. The recommendation as far as Cat5e cable, recommending unmanaged switches. That's enough. That will get you a quality signal from your source to your device. And then you can worry about how that device is handling that bit perfect signal that's coming from Roon, and where to go from there once it's inside of your listening system. But as far as the rest of that pathway, I wouldn't necessarily worry about spending extra money on audiophile hardware in the signal streaming side of things. Perennial question, asking about adding a favorite streaming service of yours to Roon, and the answer is we'd love to see them in the app. We would absolutely love to see your specific favorite streaming art service added to Roon. The reality is that Roon is a complicated app. We can't just take their code and plug it in and call it a day. We enhance everything that's displayed inside of Roon with our metadata. All of that metadata is coming from our sources and is an integral part of the Roon experience. So we need to have the freedom to modify how things are displayed and give you that extra information. On top of that, as I mentioned before, Roon has signal path. We have Roon Ready Streaming, which is high res, and we want to be able to guarantee bit perfect playback to our listeners' endpoints. And so we need to have the ability to display and understand exactly what resolutions are coming into the core and what resolutions the core is able to stream to your zones in your home. So we need an ongoing relationship with our streaming partners. Fortunately, we do have that with Qobuz and Titles, and that integration has been fantastic for us. We'd love to expand that and see that happen with more and more streaming services. So our recommendation is that you reach out to your favorite streaming service. Let them know that you're a Roon user. You'd like to see their service in our app. Communicating demand, communicating interest to the streaming services is the best way for them to recognize us and recognize the value that we would add to their product and to their user base. And hopefully through that communication, we can kind of get that kicked into gear and we can continue expanding and growing. So highly recommend that. Someone's asking, where can I access a page to display the best high-res settings for Roon settings? I want to make sure I answer this question adequately to what you're asking. So feel free to clarify this if I've missed the point. But by default, Roon is going to play your music bit perfect. If your device is Roon ready or Roon tested, when you click the Add Zone to My Roon button inside a device setup, Roon has already automatically configured your device to be the best it can be. We've turned on all the switches that match compatibility. If your device is MQA capable and you're streaming music from Tidal, we will enable its ability to render, and we will use the Roon app to do the core decode on that MQA file. So, any of that minutia in setup for Roon Ready and Roon tested devices, when you connect them to the Roon app, you do not need to worry about whether or not your high-res settings are turned on or off. Roon is doing that automatically, and you're getting the best you can get by default. If you want to dig in and do it yourself, if you want to customize specific settings and maximize a specific use case that you have in mind, you can do that from device settings. You'll click on your zone, a gear icon will appear, and you can modify a whole host of different kinds of either resolution outputs or max resolution that can be delivered to your device, its MQA compatibility, DSP volume, whether you have local volume turned on for your device, or if you want Roon to perform software volume to your device. any of those options are available there, and it's fully customizable. So again, I recommend checking out help.roonlabs.com, type in device setup, and you will see a visual guide to exactly what you're looking for to really dig in and customize exactly what the settings are going to your zone. But if you want bit perfect, you want the best quality audio going to your zone, leave it alone, leave it standard. If you don't turn on any DSP, you just want bit perfect audio delivered to your device in high res, standard setting, especially for Roon ready and Roon tested devices, is the way to go. It's out of the box, ready for you to get the most out of your hi-fi. So that would be my recommendation there. Is it advisable to use a Roon nucleus directly connected to a DAC via USB as a music streamer? Or do we recommend that you use your nucleus separately as a core and then put a streamer between the nucleus and your listening system? Ultimately, this is up to you and what your budget allows. If you're looking for our holistic recommendation, it's always to isolate your core from your listening system if you can. Ethernet runs are long. They can separate the core, which is a computer, a intrinsically, a noisy device, and getting that isolation and a dedicated streamer as the receiving point on your listening system just ensures that you're going to have the least amount of noise around the electronics in your device or in your listening system. So that would be our biggest recommendation for a question like that. Past that, if you maybe don't have budget for a streamer or your space only allows you to keep your nucleus close to your listening system, that is still okay. It's not a bad setup at all. We've designed the nucleus to be as absolutely quiet as we possibly can. Still a computer at the basis, but if you just can connect it via USB and that's the best connection you have, nucleus is fanless. It is designed to be a hi-fi component, and that is okay. But generally speaking, we do recommend isolating your core via Ethernet from your main listening system if possible. All right. Next question is there a limit on the number of grouped endpoints that can be run with a Roon core as long as they and the Roon core have a wired internet connection? That's a great question. You can group, first and foremost, you can group all of your zones together as long as they're on the same protocol. And that means, if you have a bunch of Roon ready stuff, all that can be grouped together, AirPlay or Chromecast stuff, AirPlay together, Chromecast together. You can't group, say, Roon ready and Chromecast or AirPlay and Roon ready together all at once because they're different protocols that communicate at different speeds. And Roon wants to make sure that you're getting gapless payback and you don't have zone drift on the output side of things where things would be frustrating if they weren't all playing together at the same time. So because of that limitation of different protocols communicate at different speeds and different amounts of information, we can't group them together because we want you to have a nice seamless and pleasant grouped listening experience. So with that in mind, the only limitation you're going to run into when grouping multiple zones and having multiple grouped zones in a home will come down to how powerful your core is. By and large, we find that, say you have, I don't know, a laptop running as your main core, you can probably see 6 to 7 zones played simultaneously before you're going to start noticing it bogging down. Maybe a little less than that, depending on the laptop. If you want to stream to a whole bunch of zones all at once, then we recommend something like the Nucleus Plus, more powerful core that has a faster processor and can handle that load for doing all of the simultaneous streams at once. So from a technological perspective, Roon is capable of having a whole bunch of zones in a group and then having a whole bunch of groups together. In theory, as long as the power is there, it's almost limitless. But of course, the power isn't necessarily there, and it'll boil down to what hardware you're using. Great question for community. and just throwing it out there and saying, what have people done? What were you able to accomplish with the least amount of hardware involved or setup? Because I'm sure some people have done some pretty wild and fun stuff. So definitely would recommend just throwing that out on community, saying, hey, what can I group together and how many zones can I go to before hitting the ceiling of what my hardware is able to do? Could you please elaborate more on IDMP switch that we recommended during our presentation? Oh, okay. I'm glad Norris corrected this in his direct reply, and I'll kind of read this out a little bit. IGMP is a setting regarding the ability of devices that use multicast to communicate on your home internet network. Roon uses multicast to make it self-recognizable as well as to communicate to the devices on your home internet network in order to stream music. It's kind of their way of creating that initial handshake of, hey, I'm here, and then the other device saying, hey, I'm over here. And then everybody's able to talk to each other. Sometimes a router will deny that handshake or just not communicate that or not allow that communication of, hey, I'm over here. So our recommendation is just try turning it on and off and seeing if that kind of reset on the whole process allows devices to recognize each other again. We find that relatively frequently, simply making that refresh happen kind of opens the gateways and devices can start talking again. Would using an Ethernet to your Roon core, Ethernet connection to your Roon core, introduce interference to your DAC? No, Ethernet wouldn't introduce any interference on its own. In fact, arguably, Ethernet is going to offer the least amount of interference of any internet networking protocol and connectivity capability. We recommend the core being farther away from your DAC because the core is a computer. Computers make RF noise, they make audible noise, and you don't want that in your listening system. Audio hardware is designed to be quiet. It's designed to eliminate RF noise. And that's why we'd recommend using an Ethernet streamer connected to your DAC or using a streaming DAC itself with that hardware all built into its own. And that is what's isolating that noise in your listening system. So that would be our recommendation there. Can there be two Roon cores on the same internet network? Does that cause problems with Roon connections? Yeah, you can have two Roon cores on your home internet network. Keep in mind that every license you have is associated with your account. And you can put that on whatever core you like, and you can move it to whatever new core you want, but only one license per core. So if you're going to try and run two cores all at once, you need two licenses. Past that, it wouldn't create any problems with connecting to any zones or any kind of streaming like that. It would likely be kind of confusing. You might wonder why you're not seeing a zone because you didn't enable it, or maybe one zone is being fidgety because each core is trying to get control of that zone and play music to it. It's not a recommended habit to have two cores on your network. Ultimately, it's going to make a little bit more headache for you in general, but it's certainly possible. And in general, as long as only one is running or you're only actively using one at a time, it shouldn't create any issues for your listening experience or Roon itself. It just might cause confusion along the way. Someone talking about how they have a Core Hugo TT, and they're talking about its resolution support. Cord notes that their DAC is capable of 32-bit audio playback at 384 kilohertz. And they're talking about how there are hiccups or latency inside of Roon when streaming to that DAC at that resolution. That is a great question. There are a couple things to keep in mind. Depends on what your core is, depends on how powerful your core hardware is, and if it's able to do the upsampling of your music file that you're asking it to do. Depends on what your base file is. So there are a few factors involved in why you might be seeing dropouts or hiccups, specifically for the Hugo TT, which is a USB DAC. So I imagine it's connected via USB to your core. We'd want to know a little bit more about the hardware involved. You might want to make sure that you're running the latest drivers from Cord to connect to your DAC. Certainly could be very relevant to what your DAC is able to pick up from Roon and how your computer is able to communicate with your DAC. In terms of, can my DAC play this resolution and can Roon communicate this resolution to my DAC? Yes, absolutely. Experiencing hiccups, even at the far end of that super high resolution, even as you're performing upsampling and things like that, that is something Roon is able to do. Alluding back to the whole how many zones can I play kind of conversation as well, it boils down to how powerful is your computer. If you're trying to do this with, say, an older MacBook Air with a weaker, older processor, chances are that might be the bottleneck here. It's trying to do this computationally heavy process, and it's running out of steam. If upgrading computer hardware isn't on the table, you could try closing other applications and seeing what goes from there. But yeah, I would see what factors we can eliminate here to really simplify things down and make sure that Roon is getting as much processing power as it has available, and then go from there. Because from a technical point of view and a capability point of view, everything is harmonious there. That is a Roon tested DAC, and we are able to send that data that your DAC supports to your DAC from the Roon app. So we just want to make sure all the other factors are in place and compatible from there. Someone's asking if there's a way to plug in legacy devices like a turntable or a tape deck that they have old analog media on and play that into Roon. That is an interesting feature request. It's not something that exists right now, but if you go to community, we do have a whole feature requests section, and that would be an awesome thing to kind of throw in there and say, hey, this would be a pretty cool Roon feature. It's not something that exists right now. For what it's worth, if you were to do this through Roon, your device, your audio would be digitized before Roon could digitally broadcast it over your internet to your other devices. So let's say you have media that is on a record that you can't find anywhere else, and you really want to listen to it, but you want to listen to it through devices that are connected to your Roon system. You could always go through the process of digitizing it yourself and then adding it to your Roon library and listening to it that way. It's not quite the same live experience. You don't get to watch the record spin, but you can, purchase a record player that does digitizing, have your media digitized if you so choose, and then Roon could certainly play back that that file and let it stream around your home in that way, if that's of interest to you. Past that, however, it is something that sounds pretty cool. Our team probably would be interested in checking out what making that happen would look like. So let our technical team know that there's interest. It could be a pretty cool Roon feature way down the road in the future. So good thought. Someone is talking about running a QNAP NAS with over 150,000 tracks, a whole lot of tracks. They're noting that Roon is constantly indexing and that Roon takes a long time to return a search result when trying to find their music. And we are the Roon core and the NAS are wired to Ethernet, and they share a switch. Asking, how can I improve performance? My friend, you have a very large library. You need a more powerful core. That is ultimately the simplest solution here. Over 150,000 tracks is actually, for what it's worth, when a customer comes to us, when we talk about Nucleus and talk about which core is best for you, 100,000 tracks is the dividing line where we say you should upgrade to the Nucleus Plus. Exactly the same as all of the processing power involved for upsampling or for multi-zone streaming. When you hit that threshold of having a lot of media that you want to play, having additional processing power really works in your favor. And in a case like this, we would be talking about Nucleus Plus as your core because you have so much music to listen to. So as you found, Roon is able to find your music. It's able to play it, but it is going to be indexing your music, and it is going to take a while to sort your index and find the correct information for you to play. And that's all entirely based off of processing power. So if you want improved performance, you want to make sure that you're able to browse your music in a reasonably responsive manner, you're going to need to upgrade your core for this particular purpose, especially with such a large library. I think we have just about caught up on all of the questions. I'll leave things open for just a little bit longer in case anybody has any remaining questions. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks for all of your questions you brought in. Hopefully the answers we were able to share here were helpful. If you have more questions, please let us know on community.roonlabs.com. We can get really in depth with you there. We have a full-time staff manning community and offering our advice and our help for technical problems, system questions, anything like that. If you have just general knowledge that you want to gain, you want to kind of browse the Wikipedia of Roon, go to help.roonlabs.com. Super helpful resource. It'll give you a lot of information about what you can do with Roon, how you can use DSP, how you can do equalization for zones, how you can set audio zone settings and things like that. Super helpful resource. I think we're about all caught up. Again, if you have any specific questions about why something's not working in Roon or something like that, check out community. Our team can help you there. This webinar will be available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit it at some point in the future. And I think that about wraps it up for all of us. So happy 4th of July. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we will catch you in the next one.